Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Thank you all for joining me today. My name is Daharsh. I'm here with Advanta IRA, and our topic is going to be what is widely considered the most diverse tool in self-direction, the checkbook control strategy. So again, my name is Daharsh. I've been with Advanta since 2016. I've spent a number of years doing a few different roles with the company. So I've had time as a client account manager, handling clients' needs and processing transactions day to day. What I currently do is on the business development side, where I actually network, educate, and share these different tools and tactics with people so that they can get a better grasp of what self-direction is, how to utilize it, and apply it to their own investment goals and strategies. You can contact me using my direct phone number I've got displayed here or my email address. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions after today's webinar and would like to connect directly. So just a little bit of background about Advanta IRA as a company. We are a self-directed retirement account administrator that has been in the business and industry for over 20 years now. We've got about 3 billion in assets under management held by our clients. All of our clients' uninvested funds are held in basically secured accounts until you're ready to fund an investment transaction. So there's FDIC insurance on all your money that you don't have out actively in an investment. And one thing we do to stand ourselves above and beyond other competitors in this space is we pair each client with a dedicated client account manager that is your go-to one-to-one point of contact if you have any questions, want to review any IRS rules, or get anything done with your account. I did spend about 5 years in that role, and I can give you from firsthand experience that person will get to know you. They'll be able to answer your questions in manners that work with your learning style or the way you like to interpret information and so forth. And it's really a really smooth process and what we call like a white glove concierge style customer service model. So brief agenda for today's webinar. I'm just going to cover the basic rules of self-directed investing and using a retirement account in alternative assets. Then I'm going to go into hyper-focusing on the checkbook control strategy, what it is, how it works, how to set one up, and what the IRS rules are surrounding these LLCs. Then some legal considerations you should be aware of as you make your decision if this is a good fit for you or not. We've got a case study going over an investment strategy handled 3 different ways, and then any final questions you may have. With regard to questions, I will let you know the audience is going to be muted for the duration of my webinar today, but there is a question box in your GoToWebinar panel. Please feel free to post anything there that you'd like me to address. I'll try to address them as I go, as long as they relate to what I'm presenting on in the moment. If they don't relate, as I'm making the points or presentation throughout the slides, I will cover some final questions at the end of the presentation. So feel free to share with me anything you'd like. I'll be able to answer those on this recorded session. If you're not so comfortable with that, you can always email or call me directly as well, as I mentioned earlier. A brief disclaimer, I am here to provide educational content. So please be sure to do your own due diligence before you make any investment or participate in any specific strategy. That includes consulting with your own team of attorneys, accountants, CPAs, financial advisors, whatever that team looks like for you. Do your thorough due diligence before you jump into any specific investment. If you've not heard about a self-directed IRA, that's actually very common. Only about 4% of US-based retirement accounts are self-directed in an industry that's got about $40 trillion in it. So it's really just that most people are not familiar that this even exists. And when they find out that it exists, they apply it to whatever their investment strategies or goals are. And most times, at least diversify into the self-directed space. But a lot of times you may have a financial advisor company or fiduciary holding your retirement funds. And that's great for what it's worth, investing into publicly traded stocks, bonds, mutual funds, those types of assets. But if you really want to get more control of your retirement dollars and kind of guide your retirement money into assets that you have a better focus on or a better interest in, that is what self-direction is for. So hopefully this is educational for everyone. And even if self-direction is not a good fit for you, you can at least walk away with a better understanding and maybe even share some information about this with people in your network that it could benefit. I did see a question come in about the slides for the presentation. If you'd like a copy of the PDF of today's slides, you can email me directly and I'll be happy to send them to you. Otherwise, the recording of today's live webinar will be available on our YouTube page within about a day to 2 business days. You'll get an email automatically if you've registered for this webinar with a copy of that recording. So you can watch it back at your own pace. If you'd like the actual PDF slides, you just need to email me directly and I'll be very happy to share those with you. So when we're talking about self-direction, we're not specifically talking about IRAs, like traditional and Roth IRAs that most people are familiar with. There are other retirement plans that you can also self-direct that we offer. So if you're a small business owner, the SEP IRA and Simple IRA are good options. They have higher annual contribution limits and a few additional benefits, but you do have to potentially include any employees that you have in that business that you're operating. If you're operating a business with no employees, just yourself and maybe your spouse or a business partner, an individual K or a solo 401k plan would be a great option for you. If you're someone with a high deductible health policy, then a health savings account can also be self-directed. And if you've got a young one in your life that you'd like to set aside some tax sheltered money for their educational expenses, the covered out education savings account is going to be a great option. If you're not sure what the best option for you is, or you maybe have one account type and don't know if there's a better account type out there for you, again, just reach out to me directly. We can have a conversation about what your needs are, what your status is, and I can definitely point you in the direction of the best account type to fit your needs. So I'm not going to read off every single item on this list, but here's just a few examples of different alternative investments you could make with a self-directed account. It is very diverse. You could pretty much invest into anything under the sun you'd like to, with a few simple limitations that I'm going to cover on the next slide. So just start the wheel spinning in your head. What are you passionate about? What do you have an expertise in that you could generate passive income through investing in that sphere, whatever that may be, whether it's real estate, whether it's private lending, whether it's other asset classes outside of those two characteristics of real estate or issuing loans out to people. Anything you want to do, there's likely a strategy or a way to do it within your retirement account. And more specifically, what we're talking about today is utilizing checkbook control, which is an extremely diverse way to utilize any tax that you'd like to with your retirement funds. So as promised, I'm just going to briefly go over the rules for self-direction. The only assets you're not allowed to invest into with these types of accounts are life insurance policies and hard to value collectibles like antiques, fine wine, artwork, pretty much anything the IRS would see as subjective in value. Those are assets that they don't want you to hold in your retirement account. But aside from that, like I said, pretty much anything you may want to. We've seen some really, really unique investments. For example, someone's owned thoroughbred horses in their retirement account, even breeding rights to rodeo bulls. People have owned transport vehicles in their retirement account. A lot of different things you could do. And again, this is really a tool for you to base off of your expertise and your knowledge or your specific interests and put your retirement dollars in those different areas so that you can build your future self wealth or your future earnings through this retirement account, which is tax sheltered. So you're either making these investments with a tax deferred retirement account, meaning you'll pay taxes on that money later, or a post tax account, meaning you've already paid taxes on the money and you really don't ever pay taxes on whatever you grow this into moving forward. So that's really just a brief description of the difference between traditional or tax deferred and Roth or post tax. Aside from those limitations of prohibited investments, there are certain transactions you're not allowed to do with your retirement account, and those typically deal with any investment that you'd want to make with what's called a disqualified person, which is basically your family tree directly up and down. So your parents, your grandparents, your children, your grandchildren, yourself and your spouse, they're all considered disqualified persons, meaning you can't do a deal with those individuals, but you can partner with them. So the differentiation there is I can't buy a piece of property that is currently owned by a disqualified person using my retirement account, but myself and a disqualified person can partner together and buy a property together, or more specifically, my retirement account and a disqualified person, or even their retirement accounts can partner together. So think of it as sitting at a closing table. You're allowed to sit on the same side of the table with disqualified persons, but you're never allowed to be on the opposite side of the table, shaking hands and doing a deal with them. The other item listed here on this slide is UBIT and UDFI taxes. I'm not going to go into those today, but just for a brief description, unrelated business income tax is when you're actually functioning a business that's not generating passive income, it's generating some actual active income through the investments you make. And unrelated debt financing, or UDFI, is when you're using leverage or borrowing money with your retirement account to make an investment. So if you have interest in investments that may involve either of those, again, please consult your own tax advisor or CPA. If you want additional content from Advanta IRA, we've got separate webinars out on those topics and content on our website as well. Here's a brief illustration on disqualified persons that I just described on that last slide. The one thing I'll add here is that disqualified persons not only limits these individuals, but also businesses or entities that any of these disqualified persons make day-to-day decisions on behalf of or own 50% or more controlling stake in those businesses. So those entities are extensions of the disqualified persons themselves, and you can't really buy a property or do a deal, loan money to a business that is owned by a disqualified person. So checkbook control. Description here of checkbook control is that it's a way for you to actually get direct access to your retirement dollars, typically through a bank account in the name of an LLC, whereas what most people that are not familiar with checkbook control do is simply let the custodian or administrator handle the account and execute transactions, handle the cash flow in and out of your investments that you're holding. So that is what a lot of people do. It's more simple for some people. It's cleaner, if you will, for a lot of people. But there's also the faction of people out there that want the control, that want to have direct access, a tangible ability to touch your own retirement dollars. So that's where checkbook control comes into play. What a person would do is invest through their retirement account into an LLC or also a trust, which I'll cover in a few slides, fully into an LLC or into a trust, those retirement dollars, and list themselves as the manager, or in the trust case, have a trustee appointed that actually facilitates and executes any investments and activity on behalf of the LLC or the trust agreement. So with an LLC, you can be your own manager. You set up the bank account at your own financial institution of your choice. We have some that we could refer you to for reference, but you could otherwise just go into any bank in the US and say, hey, I'd like to set up a bank account in the name of this LLC. I'm the manager. Here's all the proper paperwork. Get that account set up and then fund your retirement dollars into that account. And again, as I just referenced, you can also obtain checkbook control through a trust. While it's not as common as the LLC strategy, there are certain reasons and certain capacities that people prefer a trust to an LLC. So I've just got a brief illustration here as to what responsibilities take place between the trust and the LLC. It's a little bit different. So with an LLC, the manager can be the client, but with a trust, the client or account holder cannot be the trustee. So you'd have to either use a trustee service or appoint someone that you know, like, and trust as the trustee to your trust held by the LLC, held by the IRA, I'm sorry. Check writing capacity is held in the hands of the manager or that trustee. Title of ownership is going to be either in the name of the LLC or the trust. And the IRA is either going to be the member of the LLC or the grantor or beneficiary of the trust. So just very subtle nuances with the structure of those, but they're both viable ways to obtain checkbook control in your retirement account. So how do these LLCs get set up? Basically, what you need to do is go to the IRS's website and get a tax ID number. You need to file articles of organization in the state of your choice. It does not have to be the state in which you reside. There are certain reasons people go outside of their state of residence for various purposes. I'm not here to talk about the pros and cons of doing that, but share with you that it is a possibility. You may live in North Carolina like I do, for example, but set up your LLC in Delaware or in Wyoming or whatever state you may want to for certain purposes that are your own discretion. You could also just set it up in your own state. That's what most people do. Getting a tax ID number is really easy. You go to the IRS's website, you request a tax ID number, it gets generated pretty quickly for you. And then once you have those items in hand, and typically an operating agreement as well, which you can do a simple Google search and search single member LLC operating agreement. You can also go to an attorney or a CPA. We have a few that we could refer clients to that are either clients of ours or have worked with clients of ours in the past that do all of these services for you for a cost, obviously, but really take the work out of your hands and getting the LLC set up. But once you have your articles, your tax ID number, and usually your operating agreement in place, you can go to any bank of your choice and set up a bank account in the name of that LLC. And once that bank account's set up and you provide all that documentation to Advanta, we execute the investment to fund your retirement account into that bank account, whether again it's an LLC or a trust. So some helpful tips when you're filing for your LLC. Most states do require that you reference either LLC or just simple LC in the name of the entity. So make sure, depending on where you're setting it up, that you adhere to that if applicable. And we also want to heed caution to not using either our company name, Advanta, or the term IRA in the name of the LLC. It is an LLC owned wholly by your retirement account, but it does get a little bit murky when you reference your retirement account administrator or the term IRA in the LLC's name. I'll get into that in a moment when I describe getting the bank accounts open as to why that's an issue, but it just makes it easier and cleaner if you completely differentiate that when you're setting these things up. There does need to be a registered agent and an address. Most people use their home or their business address. You could use a registered agent service. I've seen those before in place where it's actually a third party that serves as your registered agent. I'm not sure what the costs or charges are for those, but that is something that people utilize. A lot of people, again, simply utilize just the ability to list yourself as the registered agent and use your own home address or even your office address if you want to keep home and business separate. The management does need to be indicated that you are the manager and it is a manager managed LLC. It cannot be member managed because the retirement account is the member and the retirement account does not have the capacity to actually make decisions. It's not a human person that can say yes or no on voting, if at all applicable, or make different decisions that are required of a manager. So we always identify in our instruction email when clients say they want to use checkbook control, and usually verbally articulate this to them as well, that it does need to be a manager managed LLC. And usually most people appoint themselves as the manager or even themselves and their spouse or themselves and a business partner. As long as you've got that set up in that capacity, you'll be in good order. A few additional provisions and drafting considerations to be made. The operating agreement lays out how the LLC is going to be run. So there are certain things you have to put into the operating agreement and then certain things that are actually your discretion. I've seen checkbook control operating agreements come in with 40 to 60 pages. I've also seen a 1 to 3 page operating agreement. So it's completely your discretion, but at a root minimum, you have to provide the effective date of the agreement. So when you're establishing this LLC, you have to name all the members and the managers, their ownership share and percentage or responsibilities. So in most cases, it's going to be 100% owned by your retirement account. Your management is going to be in your name or potentially a additional person, as I just outlined. How new members may be admitted to the LLC, if at all applicable. Usually that's not going to be the case once your retirement account owns 100% membership. Usually you keep it that way. Not a lot of people add in another member or sell ownership of the LLC to a non-disqualified person, but it can take place depending if you put provisions in your operating agreement for it. How members can be removed. So obviously the retirement account can't be removed. If that be the case, you'd really just be liquidating the LLC in itself and closing it out. But if you did have multiple members, you need provisions as to how you're going to remove them if a situation comes to place where you need to. Outline voting procedures and various issues, how the LLC is going to be taxed, which as long as it's a single member LLC owned by your retirement account, it's basically identified as a disregarded entity for tax purposes, unless or until those UBIT or UDFI situations come to place. And then you need to have signatures from all members and all managers. So the member signature in this case is going to come from an Advanta IRA authorized representative, and the manager signature is going to come from yourself and any additional managers that you decide to appoint. I'm just going to take a brief second to look over at the question box. I saw a few different things pop up. Someone said slides are not advancing, but then they said that they did advance, so no worries there. Can I go through the disqualified list again? Are in-laws disqualified? And then someone else said the slide was still back, but after that was when I received notice that the slides did advance. So I'll assume that you guys are all seeing the drafting and provision slide at this point in time. I will take a brief second just to go through the disqualified list again and answer the question about in-laws. So if you think of your family tree, the easiest way for me to put this is disqualified persons are the main trunk of that tree. Your parents, your grandparents, and so forth, and your children, your grandchildren, and so forth. Siblings are not disqualified. Aunts and uncles are not disqualified. In-laws technically could be disqualified because that is the parents of your spouse. If you and your spouse are binded by law, then technically they are your parents at that point as well. There are some nuances. You may be able to get an attorney to vote on your side if you wanted to do a transaction with an in-law, depending on the circumstance. Really, really weird example here. If, let's say your partner has a step parent that became married to your partner's biological parent after your partner became an adult. So that step parent never financially cared for your partner. There is reason to think that it would be allowable for you to do an investment with that in-law that is essentially a step in-law because they never had the financial responsibility of your partner. But again, these types of things are really nuanced, and I would want someone interested in making that investment with your in-laws, or I believe this person just referenced furthermore a son-in-law. If an attorney would sign off on you making that investment, if someone with a legal background and legal practice would basically give their blessing on that type of transaction. With a son-in-law, if your son-in-law is now supporting your daughter, I presume, so they are financially bound together, your retirement account cannot be seen to benefit your daughter. So making an investment with your son-in-law is going to lean on the side of prohibited, unless there are certain considerations that are obviously outside of my knowledge at this point. This is just a simple question in the webinar. But I would say just your retirement account investing in a deal where you're partnering with your son-in-law, perfectly fine. If you're sitting on the other side of the table from your son-in-law, well, then you get into, is your son-in-law financially responsible in some capacity for your daughter? Then that really means your retirement account is benefiting your daughter in a long way, shape, or form. And the IRS would say that as a do not do side of transaction. So hopefully that answered as thoroughly as I can without getting into legal advice. That is something that if you really wanted to pursue that, I'm sure you could find an attorney that could give you a kind of letter of opinion to that effect. But I just have my own compliance constraints. I can't really go into that nuance, and really I'm not educated enough from a legal standpoint to do so. All right, moving on, drafting the operating agreement, a little bit of further considerations. You may also want to provide provisions relevant to terminating the agreement, how to address disagreements between multiple members, removing or changing managers, a few other items there. The operating agreement is ultimately going to be executed by an Advanta signatory, but only after you approve of it. So what you're bringing to the table has to be vetted out by you and something you trust and believe to be the best steward of your retirement dollars or governing body of your retirement dollars as to how it outlines what's going to take place with this LLC, how it's going to be operated and run, and where your retirement dollars are going to go and what they're going to be used towards. You don't need to identify exactly your investment strategies, but more so an outline overall of how this entity is going to function. Getting the tax ID number, I've got the actual physical form here on this slide, but in most cases, you're not filling out this physical form. You're going to the irs.gov site, going to obtain a tax ID number. I set one up in November of last year myself, to be honest, and it takes about 15 to 20 minutes, and it's a really straightforward, simple process. You're just providing some basic information and going through, I think, 6 or 7 different slide pages to effectively fill out all the information required on this form. You submit it, and I believe it takes maybe a day or two to actually get your tax ID number back so you can proceed with the next steps, depending on how much they're getting. There's certain times of year where they get tons of requests for these, and it may take a little bit longer. But again, I did one in November, and I want to say I had my tax ID number the next or 2 business days afterwards. Someone just asked, will this presentation be sent via email to us? If you are here on the live recording, yes, you'll receive a copy with the link to the YouTube thing as soon as that goes up, which is usually 1 to 2 business days. A couple additional helpful tips for opening your bank account. I just want to preface this with, I put myself through college as a bank teller, so I have experience on both sides of the fence here. I know what the bank account or bank center is looking at and how they interpret these things. And I also have plenty of experience here at Advanta executing these transactions and helping to get these funded. So just some considerations. When you go into the financial institution of your choice, you're always going to want to take your LLC articles with you, your tax ID number with you, and usually at very least the signature page of your operating agreement. Sometimes they require the management section of the operating agreement. So maybe just bring the whole operating agreement for what it's worth. You might not need to show it, but just have it with you for better or worse. Not really worse, just for better. If it's possible, you don't really want to mention that this is a IRA LLC. When the typical banking center employee, whether it's your teller or your sales associate in the bank, hears the word IRA, they don't know the nuances of self-directed retirement account investing, and they're going to get tied up into trying to sell you on their IRA product or think you need to have an IRA with them, or they're going to say, oh, compliance says we can't open this LLC. Where that's not true. I spent many of calls with actual bank center managers explaining this is just a simple LLC with a single member. The member is a retirement account in this case. The manager is the individual standing in front of you. They've got all of the proper paperwork. All they need is a basic checking account in the name of this LLC. If you're not willing to grant that to them, I implore you to the client to walk into the next bank of your choice. Usually that does the trick because they don't want to lose the business and they really are just trying to hold things up to get their own IRA account out of the situation, which is not the situation at all. It's just a lack of understanding, for lack of a better term, from the bank side of things. You do not want to get a credit card or open any line of credit in the name of this entity. Again, as I referenced earlier, with your IRA not being able to be a member managed LLC, because the IRA is not a human person or an individual, your IRA account can also not open a line of credit. It cannot sign a personal guarantee because it's not a person. So all you're allowed to have with these types of accounts are a basic checking or a basic savings account. You could get into like a high yield savings if you really wanted to, but what's the point if you're going to make self-directed investments? That's really what the point of this type of account is. But never open a line of credit or sign any personal guarantees. If you want to do lending, you've got to do non-recourse lending. That's a separate topic for a separate webinar on a separate channel. We do have that content if you're interested in it, but please feel free to let me know. And again, you can set up this bank account with any financial institution of your choice. A lot of people just go to their personal bank, whether it's a credit union or a national bank or a local bank. Usually, if you get into the situation I described earlier, where you walk in and maybe you say, hey, I need to open up an LLC for my IRA, and then you get stuck in a compliance loophole, you can contact your client account manager and they will help you through it, just like I just described. But it's very easy. We have referrals to banks that have specific programs for checkbook control that we could refer you to. So feel free to let us know if you need any further guidance on that side of it. And also make sure that you never commingle your own retirement funds with your checkbook control funds. It's very, very, very important that you keep those completely separate. So if you have separate portals for your bank account, that'd be great. Set it up from an online login standpoint with a completely different email address if possible than your personal, so that you don't risk accidentally depositing your personal money into your LLC or vice versa or anything like that. It's very important. That is a big red flag if you commingle your personal funds with your retirement account funds. A question came in, how is a FDIC guarantee work for large amounts of funds in a checking account? Are there special banks which guarantee larger than typical amounts? To be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. If I'm not mistaken, FDIC goes up to $200,000 per account. It may have been bumped up to $250,000 per account. But I don't know that specific financial institutions raise that limit in any capacity, or the FDIC does above and beyond what they have as a standard status quo. That'd be more so a question to ask the banking center that you're considering working with. Follow-up question from that same individual. Do you have to have multiple checking accounts then? I would say that's a discretionary item. If I had, let's say, $500,000 in banks, I would put it across multiple accounts so that all of the accounts at most are going up to the limit of that FDIC insurance. I wouldn't ever, in my personal opinion, again, not financial advice, not tax advice, not legal advice, I would never let one bank account exceed that FDIC insurance limit. But again, that is a personal discretion. It would not require separate LLCs. Same individual just asked, would that require separate LLCs? No, just separate bank accounts in the name of that same LLC. All right, funding the checkbook. Just a brief synopsis. This is not a case study. I'll be covering a case study in a few more minutes. I've got a gentleman named Joe who's got $150,000 in a managed IRA account. He decides he wants to invest into real estate, which a fiduciary or brokerage IRA is not going to let you hold. So he sets up a Advanta IRA account to purchase properties at auction. So when you're going to do auction investing, you can certainly do it with the custodial or administrative account, but it makes it much easier to have checkbook control because you can actually show up to the auction, you can bid on different items and have the ability to pay on them, whether you stroke a check right there or have a debit card or can log into an online portal and make the payment directly, rather than coming back to Advanta saying, hey, I won this auction, I need to process this transaction. While we're still very fast at that, we can get that done in a business day or 2 business days. Having checkbook control for that type of strategy, just in most scenarios, makes it a lot more simple and smooth. So Joe completes an application, does a transfer from his existing IRA into the self-directed IRA. We get that account set up, we get it funded. Joe gets the paperwork that I described earlier in the webinar over to us. So the articles of organization, the tax ID number, the operating agreement. He confirms he's got a bank account set up and tells us either where to cut the check or what wiring instructions or ACH instructions he has for the bank account that's been established. And then we basically execute the transaction at Joe's discretion. We process an investment saying his retirement account is investing into this LLC. It's going to be 100% owned by this retirement account, and whatever the dollar consideration is constitutes 100% of the capital contribution into the LLC. And we process that transaction, send the funds out. Once the money hits that bank account, Joe can start making his investments. He can go to the auction and start bidding on different properties. Ideally, he wins one, has a smooth transaction there, and is able to hold that real estate investment in the name of the LLC in perpetuity moving forward. Maybe he rents it out. Maybe he does a upgrade to the property and sells it back to another buyer for profit. However he wants to utilize that, that is Joe's discretion. To have all that being said, all of the money for that transaction flows in and out of that LLC's bank account. So the purchase transaction going to the auction, any expenses for that property, putting a new roof on it or utilities, different things like that, that all needs to come out of that LLC's bank account. And any cash flow from that property that's generated needs to flow right back into that LLC's bank account. I'm going to cover in a few more slides when that money comes back to Advanta, or if you want to take personal possession of any of that money, how you facilitate that. But just in the context of operating the LLC, the money stays in the LLC and flows in and out based on the investments you have directly through that LLC's bank account. I feel like I've already covered just verbally a lot of these rules here on this slide. So just to clarify, there's no tax return required if it's a single member LLC. The IRA account is seen as a disregarded entity for tax purposes. So the only time you're really worried about taxes, if at all, is if you're investing with your LLC into a business that's generating active as opposed to passive income, where you're utilizing debt financing or leverage or taking out a mortgage in the name of your LLC. Now, if you're concerned with the rules or legal ramifications of these strategies, there is case law that supports that you can have a checkbook IRA and be the manager of it. That's exampled in Swanson versus Commissioner. The IRS basically told Mr. Swanson that he had conducted a prohibited transaction by being the manager of his IRA's own LLC. He challenged that, stating that he's simply serving as a steward to his retirement dollars. He's not drawing any compensation or anything like that. He's just facilitating his own checkbook control at no benefit to him besides making these investments. And he actually won that case and created a very strong case study for supporting that this is a viable strategy. And the tax court memo of T.L. Ellis, if I'm not mistaken, that scenario was where it was further clarified you cannot compensate yourself for serving as the manager of your IRA's LLC. So just because you are doing some legwork in this strategy does not mean you can buy yourself lunch or draw a salary or a commission for any of the activity you do as the manager of your retirement accounts LLC. It should all be basically done for free because, again, at the end of the day, you're just trying to generate income in your retirement account that you're going to draw from later when you retire. A few other questions came in. Just give me 1 second. These are a little bit longer here. Is there a lapse time between the request for funding IRA to the bank and back to the IRA? That really depends on the funding method you utilize. If you're having a check cut and sent either to the LLC's bank account or back from the LLC to the IRA, then you're going to be subject to a check going in the mail and a deposit hold on either end of that scenario. ACHs are free and typically pretty fast, 24 to 48 hours for an ACH. Or if you want instantaneous, you'd really just do a wire. There are wire charges, either way on that end. So that's completely up to you and your discretion and what timeline you're needing to fit whatever investment you may have on the hook. Can you structure an LLC if you have multiple accounts that you want to partner together, Roth, traditional, IRA, etc., and have the IRAs be proportional members based on their contribution? That is exactly it. I'm actually going to cover that, I believe, in 2 or 3 slides, but I will break that down a little bit further in just a few moments. Can one checkbook serve for multiple properties that have individual LLCs? One checkbook LLC can hold an unlimited number of investments in it, if that was the proper interpretation of that question. You can have a checkbook LLC and own a piece of property and issue a private loan out to somebody and own a share of private stock in another business. There's no limitation to how many assets you hold within one checkbook. If you're investing in different states other than the state the LLC is registered in, do you have to establish residency in each state or set up an LLC in each state? Domestically, typically not. You can have your LLC set up in the state of your choice and usually invest in other states without any issue. That is kind of a case-by-case basis. So that would be up to you as the retirement account holder to do your due diligence on the state you plan to invest into and verify that they don't need a in-state established LLC to hold the asset in question you're looking to purchase. Furthermore, that same principle applies to international investing. Yes, you can invest internationally with your US-based retirement account. We cover that as a topic in its own separate webinar. If you're interested in that, just shoot me a message and I can send you a link to it. But more so with international investing, you may be required to set up an LLC in that country. So sometimes, and this is again very case by case, a country will say, we will not let you own property, for example, in this country in the name of a US-based retirement account. So you would have to set up all the practices and processes I said earlier, setting up the LLC, but in Bolivia or in the UK or wherever it may be. Just throwing those names out there for generalized example. But it is part of the due diligence as the account holder and as the retirement account investor to make those sort of considerations and verify those factors. And that catches us up. I went over here. All right, so operating these types of accounts, I'm really trying to beat this home. Your existing retirement account moves into a self-direct account. You use the self-direct account to fund a checkbook control entity, whether it be a trust or an LLC, and then you make investments in the name of that trust or LLC, where the cash flow out goes straight out of that bank account to the investments you're making, and the cash flow in goes straight from those investments back into your LLC or trust bank account. It's very important that the proper titling is done. Again, the member of these LLC or trusts or beneficiary of the trust and member of the LLC has to be the full accurate name of your retirement account. In our case, Advanta IRA, for the benefit of your name and then your actual retirement account number. I've already covered everything here. As you invest, make sure the funds are flowing directly through that bank account. It's your responsibility to maintain your own bookkeeping records. So whether you're using a service like QuickBooks or just an Excel spreadsheet or even hiring a bookkeeper, you want to keep clean records just in case there is ever an audit event in the future, so that you can clearly identify and delineate, I invested into this with the LLC, I invested into that, here's where the money went in this case scenario, in this timeline. You do have to report the value of your LLC or trust to Advanta once a year. Not just Advanta, any retirement account administrator. It's called a fair market valuation requirement. It's an annual requirement. That's really the only reporting you have to do for these types of entities at the current time. And the earnings stay within the LLC until you want to use them for another investment or take a personal distribution. More foreshadowing, I'm going to cover that on the next slide after this one. You can partner. Someone asked a little bit earlier, you can partner both with yourself and your retirement account and other people's retirement accounts, multiple retirement accounts you own. The basis here is that when you're putting this operating together and you're setting up who's going to be members in the LLC, all of the members' ownership percentages are going to be directly delineated from the dollars that they bring into the bank account. So for a rounded example, if you have 4 members and each person or retirement account brings in $25,000, everyone's going to have 25% ownership, $100,000 in the account, and then you make investments as you see fit. When you're ready to start drawing out of that account, everyone has to take their proportional amount out. So if you down the line want to take $10,000 out, the other 3 partners are going to need to figure out what they want to do with their $10,000 so that you do not delineate your share of ownership in the entity by drawing money out when the others have not drawn their fair share or equal percentage out of the account. With multiple parties, the LLC can make managing an investment less cumbersome. So maybe someone's the person in charge of a certain aspect of managing the LLC and you're in charge of another aspect. Membership can take many different shapes and forms. That's up to you to build your management team and decide who you're going to partner with as far as members go. Again, it can be multiple retirement accounts you own, retirement accounts of multiple members of your family. Again, this is everyone joining the entity at the outset. So there's no disqualified person issues here because everyone's on the same side of the table of setting up the LLC and investing into the LLC. But you can't buy and share ownership with disqualified persons. So if you and your father go into an LLC 50-50 and each put up $50,000 and your LLC needs more money and you want to put in another $10,000, your father's retirement account has to put in $10,000 as well. Otherwise, you're limited and really have your hands tied for the ability to add more funds into the account. That's a main reason you want to use caution when you partner with disqualified persons is the ability to add additional capital is prohibitive because you cannot buy them out of some of their shares or sell some of your shares to them. It's got to stay at the ownership percentage that was set when you established this entity based on the dollar amount you brought to the table to begin with. So if you want to use any of the money that's currently in this LLC, the funds do have to flow back from the LLC or trust to your administrator. So back to Advanta IRA, or if you happen to be working with another administrator, back to that company before you can actually take a distribution or take personal possession of the money for personal purposes. While you do have personal possession of the money through the LLC, you're, as I mentioned earlier, not allowed to use it for anything for yourself. So if you want to, let's say, go on a vacation or you're ready to start retiring and need to start drawing some money to pay your bills, that money has to flow back from the entity, back from the checkbook control to the administrator to properly document to the IRS that you're taking the distribution of that money out of the account. And to wrap it up, again, I'm going to do one case study that's kind of a three-headed monster here. So purchasing a piece of real estate with a retirement account. Same guy from earlier, Joe, he's got $150,000 in a traditional IRA and he wants to buy some real estate. He decides he's going to buy a single family for rental purposes. He finds a house for $100,000. Don't know where he found that. And he needs an additional $20,000 to work with to get the property ready to rent. So he thinks this property is going to generate $1,000 a month after repairs. Here are a few different ways he can buy the property. Option one, directly through the IRA. It was what was referenced earlier as the custodial or administrative route. He sets up a self-direct account. He gets the account open and funded, tells his client account manager, hey, I'm buying this property. And that account manager works directly with the closing attorney and agents to facilitate the purchase in the name of this retirement account held by Joe. Advanta IRA handles all of the cash flow out to process the purchase and all of the cash flow out as those renovations are being made, and then all of the cash flow in as the property is rented out when rental income is being generated. Joe tracks all of this through his online portal or by contacting and staying in communication with his account manager, but it's a very simple process facilitated through Advanta, and Joe really doesn't have any specific legwork aside from finding the property, identifying the actual property. He can double check the work that the contractors do on the property, but again, the payment comes straight from his retirement account that is held with Advanta. Option two, using checkbook control, which we're talking about here. So same thing that we've gone over a few times here. Joe sets up a self-direct account, gets the funds moved over. In that time where he's waiting for the funds to hit this account, he goes to the IRS's website, goes to the state in which he'd like to set up the LLC and gets the articles of organizations drafted up and then gets an operating agreement. Once the account's funded and Joe has those items in hand, he provides them to his account manager and we execute a transaction to send the funds to the bank account that's been established. From there, in the name of this LLC, Joe turns around and goes to that closing table and buys the property, facilitates managing those vendors that are doing the $20,000 worth of rehab work. And then when he finds a tenant for that property, make sure all of the income generated flows into that LLC's bank account. And through a trust, very, very similar to the LLC case study. The only difference here is that, as I referenced earlier, Joe cannot be the trustee of his own trust, so he does have to have a trustee facilitate this. So basically setting up the self-direct account, providing the trust agreement, listing the beneficiary of the trust to be the IRA or the grantor, listing a trustee, say non-disqualified person. We execute the investment, send the funds to the trust, and then the trustee facilitates executing all the investment paperwork to buy that piece of property. The trustee sends the funds out from the bank account once the $20,000 of upgrades are done to the property, and the trustee facilitates making sure that the income flows back into that trust account. Funding Joe's trust, it's very simple. It's very akin to the checkbook control strategy. To be honest, there are some subtle nuances there that are completely up to the investor account holder to decide what's better for them, a trust versus operating agreement LLC structure. I'm not here to say one way or the other is better at all. I do see a lot more LLCs than I see, to be honest, though. Pros and cons of checkbook control. With the pros, it's easier to keep your arm's length from IRA funds when you're not using checkbook control. So you're having the administrator facilitate transactions. You have the clear records of activity on your retirement account. So if you're doing everything with Advanta IRA, basically all of our records at real time are going to show you what you've done with those funds. You get an email notice when cash flows in your account or out of your account. You have quick access for funds if you're going to auction, if you want to use checkbook control. So you actually have an actual debit card or a checkbook to stroke a check and process transactions. When we are administering the account, the way our fees are structured is typically you're paying fees based on the total number of assets you hold. But if you hold checkbook control and each of your assets are held within the LLC, you're cutting down on your fees because we're only billing you based on the LLC being the asset held in your retirement account, and everything you own within the LLC is free and fair game from that standpoint. We're not charging you by each individual asset held within the LLC, just for the fact that the LLC is on our records. The LLC also offers additional anonymity. So obviously, as I mentioned, you don't want to list IRA or Advanta in the name of your LLC. So if you just list it as Handyman LLC, for example, and someone wants to look up property records, they can see Handyman LLC owns this piece of property. It doesn't say John Doe owns this piece of property, and John Doe is someone they could research and find online and get in contact with you. Who knows? The pros, again, you can hold a number of different assets with these entities. The cons is if you don't have checkbook control, you can't write checks and make immediate purchases. You're responsible for more record keeping, so making sure you have good books for the LLC. You have a lack of oversight from the administrator. So while I did make you all aware of the rules and regulations, it's important to note that once you have the LLC set up, the onus is on you to not do something prohibited. We're not there standing over your shoulder saying, hey, that is prohibited, you shouldn't do that. You certainly still have your client account manager you could reach out to and run things by before you actually do a transaction, but it's possible for you to do something prohibited with an LLC. There is potential for more administrative fees if you have multiple assets. Again, that's exactly what I just said, the opposite way. If you have 3 different pieces of property and they're all held directly through Advanta, that's 3 different annual asset fees versus 1 annual asset fee of the LLC. And additional capital calls, again, could be problematic if you have multiple members. If it's a single member, as long as you have other funds in retirement accounts of the same tax status, so traditional or Roth, you can move more money into your Advanta account and send that additional capital into the LLC very easily and smoothly. So what is the best strategy for you? Again, consult with your own team to decide on what strategy you may want to utilize, what state you may want to register your LLC in, any other considerations to be identified in your operating agreement based on your needs and your use case. Most clients do simply just choose to hold the accounts at Advanta and let us do the record keeping. So this strategy is really for people that are more entrepreneurial driven and want that direct access, maybe to move faster on investments or consolidate their fees, do different things from a management standpoint that they otherwise aren't able to do with a custodial account. It is possible to switch between strategies. So maybe you buy some properties in an LLC and decide you don't want to have the LLC anymore. You can unwind the LLC and send those properties to be quitclaim deed over directly into your retirement account, basically eliminate the LLC, or vice versa. You can own 5 properties in your self-direct account and say, hey, this is getting administratively non-feasible. I'd rather set up an LLC, title all of these properties into the LLC, and manage it that way. I'm not here to provide any advice or counsel on the strategies. I'm just here to give you guys some information. Hopefully I've done right by you and done so in a good, clear manner, and given you some good information to chew on. The key takeaway points I want everyone to walk away from is that checkbook control is a great strategy for investors seeking flexibility and freedom. There are specific considerations for setting up an LLC or a trust or even a solo K with checkbook control, which I didn't necessarily get into today, but that is an option. You can have checkbook control through your solo 401k. That's one of the plan options that we offer. And any personal use of funds must flow from that checkbook to the administrator for proper distribution reporting to the IRS. So never take money out of the checkbook for your own personal use directly. That is prohibited. That's a big red flag. The IRS does not like to see that occur. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. We do a lot of educational content. We put out 2 of these educational webinars a week. We have a podcast called the Alternative Investing Advantage Podcast, hosted by my colleague, Alex Perney. He brings on great guest speakers and talks about different topics, a little bit more flexible with the consideration of educational content versus just an actual conversation with experts in different fields of industry. We have a blog if you're interested in some of the written format news in the self-directed industry and space. So feel free to check any of those out. You can go to events or podcast page on our website and see what we've got coming up next. It's really easy to get these accounts started up. It takes about 15 minutes to complete our application. Getting your account funded takes roughly a week or so. And once you have that account funded and maybe you set up a checkbook control LLC or a trust, you can go ahead and start investing however you see fit. Again, this is my contact information. I'll leave it on the screen for about 30 seconds or so. I hope you all have gotten some great information out of today's webinar. Please feel free to reach me directly if you have any further questions I could answer for you or want to start getting an account set up. I'd be happy to help you with that process as well. And I will go ahead and sign off now. Thank you all so much.